Too old to buy a house at 55? We unpack the real risk of jumping in too late, where the wrong move could drain your cash and upset your retirement.
We are back in your life, and today's topic, should you buy your first home at 55? Or is it too late and you should rent and invest? Michael, you're a mortgage broker, eh?
I am a mortgage broker. I don't think you've ever sounded so Australian. That was
Crikey, it's a first home.
Yeah. Look, hey, this one, actually, we get fairly regularly customers coming to us, and maybe they're a little bit later in life, 45, 50, 55, and they're actually buying their first home. And 1,000 different reasons why, they're in this position. And sometimes it's not their first home, but they're in the same position as a first home buyer. And usually that's from like a divorce or something messy like that.
They happen.
Amen. Basically, we kind of wanted to dig into it and answer the question like, should you actually buy at this point? Or is there another way to do it? And people buy for a lot of reasons, right? And a lot of those are emotional reasons, not financial reasons. People dress up their emotional reasons as financial reasons. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, they are just emotional reasons. So we're going to dig into it.
So just to be clear, we love people buying homes to live in.
And I hate 55-year-olds.
Mike, you don't hate 55-year-olds. Usually they're the wealthier ones, which are good clients. Fundamentally, though, what we believe is you save up some money, you buy a home, you pay down some debt, you buy some investment property. Once you pay off the debt, you start investing into funds. Now, that is the formula we believe, but one size does not fit all, which is why we're lucky to have a job.
Yeah.
Because, Mike, the question is, if you are starting a bit later, is it going to be too late to be able to achieve the rest of your goals?
Yeah, does it make sense, right? And if we think about it, your prime earning years, 30 to 50, right? Like that's when you're focusing on those growth assets, you're using property to build wealth. You've got enough time, right? And we always talk about this. When you're making a financial decision, you've got to weigh up the risk and the timeline, right? The risk level might be right, i.e. buying a house, but the timeline might be wrong. Or the timeline might be right, going into an aggressive fund for your KiwiSaver when you've got a long time, but the risk level you can't handle. So you've got to marry those two things up, right? And leverage is really important and a great way to build your wealth, taking some of your money, using a lot of the bank's money, blowing up the asset. But again, that requires time. So that's what we really wanted to talk about. Like retirement years, usually 60 plus. That kind of middle point there, I've gone, you're earning up till 50, you're retiring at 60, 65. If you're stuck in that middle bit, should you be buying the house?
Yeah, and a big part is people going, oh, you're telling me not to buy my first home. Buying your first home is great, but the question is, if you make that decision, what are the implications on the other side? And financial planning, setting goals is really a big game of would you rather. Mike, you probably played Would You Rather a couple of times, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I lose.
Mike, just to be clear, you can never lose Would You Rather.
Yeah, like I end up drinking a lot.
In financial planning, though, it is really about going, if you want to own your first home and you want to have that stability and that security and not be, able to be kicked out of your home, what are the consequences on the other side? And it might be the age you can retire or the level of income that you can have in retirement. And there is no right or wrong answer, but people should not, like you're saying, people justify these things from an emotional perspective, but you've just got to go, what other things are going to happen off the back of this decision?
Yeah, so let's hit some key points about the property market, because fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. So average house price at the moment, about $914,000, forecasted to rise another 5% in 2025. That's just because the average increases between 5 and 6%, somewhere around there. It may be a little bit less, but we'll see how it goes. Unlike shares, property as an asset class can't be sold off in chunks. You can't sell a bedroom to go on holiday, right? So while it is great to grow your wealth, once we get to the other end, it might not be so good. Interest rates at the moment, you're sitting somewhere around 4s, 5s, which is long-term, a little bit high, but still kind of average. And it's been a slow couple of years for the housing market in New Zealand. So that's kind of where we're sitting at in terms of the asset and the market.
So it's great to talk about this stuff in theory, but what we've got for you is a case study, which is always a great way to learn. And we're going to talk to you about that case study for a 55-year-old buying their first home after this break. If you're not sure whether you should buy your first home or rent and invest, We do this every day with a financial plan. We help you set the goals, we'll run projections, and kind of help you make an informed decision, give you that clarity. So if that sounds interesting to you, click on the show notes below. Love to have a chat. Now back to the episode.
All right, James. So I'm 55. I come to you and I go, should I buy a house, right? Maybe I've got a little bit of KiwiSaver. I've got some savings. I've got 20% deposit. So, I am in the region. What should I do?
So this is coming back to that big game of would you rather, what's most important to you. It will also depend on your income, your expenses, and where you live in the country is quite material as well. If you live in Invercargill versus Remuera in Auckland, the amount of debt you're going to have to take on and try and pay off over a period of time is going to be materially different. Fundamentally, this is quite simple. What you're trying to do is you're going to take on some debt. You need to clear that debt by the time you retire and then have enough money to maintain a lifestyle. So an example would be, say you want to buy $1 million house with an $800,000 mortgage. You don't just need to pay off that mortgage by the time you are retired. If you want an income of $100,000 a year in retirement, you need then to get to $2 million of assets. And for most people, Mike, if we have to save $2.8 million over a decade in that example, which $100,000 a year as an income. A lot of people want to travel, want to not have to count every penny. That's a lot of money to save over a decade.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And again, it's, we don't like sitting on the fence with this stuff, but it is going to depend on your situation. But you've just got to remember, it's still just a box that you live in, right? And you might go, oh, well, property works for everyone. You grow your wealth over time. The time thing is what we're just missing a bit here. So you've just got to be really sure that you can pay that debt down and then keep saving to hit those goals.
And realistically, people going like property is a great way to leverage to grow your wealth. If you're 55, retire at 65, you're not going to be leveraging further because you have to pay down the debt. The value of the house would have to go up. Then we're borrowing more money. Then we've got to wait another decade for the house to go up in value. Like it's way too high risk for me when I'm talking to a client.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes we get people come to us with different strategies around property when they're a little bit later, right? Like they want to flip properties or do something that again is even more risky. And fundamentally what it comes down to is, do you have the balance sheet to do this? And with flipping, especially the time, the experience, the know-how, and if you continue to dial up the risk, the chances of things going wrong increase naturally, and you don't have a lot of time to recover. If you're flipping a property at 25, and something goes wrong, you can probably recover, right? If you're flipping properties at 55 and something goes wrong, yeah, different kettle of fish.
The problem as well is some people will go, I need to catch up. So either I've gotten divorced, I've lost half of my assets, or I've made some bad decisions in the past, or a lot of these things have just started to click. So I need to take higher levels of risk to get to the outcome that I desire. But if you don't have as much time, to your point, you could end up back at zero. So yep, you could make lots of money doing high risk approaches, but what is the risk associated and how much jeopardy does it potentially put you in come retirement?
Yeah. And do you know what I would love if they made it compulsory for everyone who wanted to flip properties? Like if we could just do a market survey of everyone who's flipped a property recently in the last 6 months and how much money they made. And that number is like publicly available to people because everyone's like, I'm going to make 150 grand. I'm going to make 70 grand. I'm going to make 200 grand. I spoke to someone the other day. We're talking about something completely different. It was like buy and hold strategy or multis or something. And they were saying they recently flipped a property they mentioned it in passing. And I was like, hey, just out of interest, how much did you make? And they're like, oh, well, we actually had to JV it because we didn't have enough equity. I was like, oh, okay, well, like, how much did you make? And they was like, oh, well, we made money. And I was like, yeah, but like how much? And he's like, well, after everything, 10 grand. And I was like, yep, thought so.
For the risk.
Yeah, that is a lot of risk for 10 grand. Yeah.
I know you and I from time to time have like the opportunity to contemporaneously settle a property and go like, we can make this amount of money. And my response every time is for the level of risk, it's not worth the amount of money.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think the most recent one we got offered, we might make 45 grand each. And I'm not saying 45 grand isn't a lot of money. I'd love 45 grand. However, the level of risk we would have to take to get there, yeah, it's just the benefit does not outweigh the risk.
Especially if you've got a long-term plan,
Yeah.
which we do. I try my best to get you to stick to this plan, Michael, but that's for another day, is that we're paying down debt, we're buying multis, eventually we're going to start investing back into shares.
Yeah.
Like you go, well, how much risk, if we get stuck, we might get this money, but if we get stuck with this debt, how much risk is going to create to the plan?
Yeah, a lot.
I don't really want to think about to be honest.
Absolutely.
So coming back to the 55-year-old, I think the other thing that is important to talk about in this situation, which I do think more and more, is the risk of rents potentially outstripping inflation by a lot going forward. And then how do you factor that in from a projections perspective? Because that is the other component here. My general thoughts is a higher and higher percentage of the population, like in more developed markets in other parts of the world, will rent longer term. I think there's going to be more rights for renters over time as well. And it would become more normal to rent and invest. But I get the piece around like in retirement, you want stability. You don't want somebody to be able to kick you out of your home. That it's just, you want your place, right? You want to be able to make it your own.
Yeah.
But you just can't look at that in isolation. You have to think about, really, for a 55-year-old, there's only two things we're talking about. Are you going to have a debt? At what point we have a debt-free home? What level of income do you need to retire with? At what age? They are really only variables that we need to focus on. So make sure you are thinking about in totality, not just, I want to be my own landlord.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, really, I would say if you're thinking I am in this scenario or I'm close to this scenario, just get a financial plan.
Yeah.
Like I honestly just say you have to have this written down and stepped out in front of you so you know what decisions you are making.
So the other thing I would say is when we do these episodes, I get a lot of people reaching out off the back of it. Mike, it's not usually about the person watching the episode. They usually have like a friend or a family member or something like that. Feel free to reach out to have a chat. Or if you've got a financial advisor locally you want to work with, that's fine as well. The most important thing is you need to have a plan. You need to have clarity for these decisions and think about the bigger picture, not just, I want to be my own landlord. We'll wrap it up right there. Much love to Lighthouse Financial for sponsoring this episode. Please make sure to subscribe, review, like, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers.